At 82 years old, Jimmy Page hasn't released a single record since 1988. Yet Forbes magazine has just declared him the finest rock guitarist in history. For 50 years, he quietly protected a secret, something his bandmates never mentioned and his managers actively concealed. Now, with nothing left to risk at his age, Page has finally spoken. What he shared has rocked the music world to its core, and after hearing it, you'll never experience Led Zeppelin the same way again. Page turned 81 on January 9, 2025. Across his long career, he's received the Order of the British Empire for charity work in Brazil, a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award with Led Zeppelin, honorary doctorates from the University of Surrey and Berklee College of Music, a United Nations Peace Award in 2010, and a tribute from President Obama at the Kennedy Center in 2012. He's also an honorary citizen of Rio de Janeiro. Forbes named Led Zeppelin the greatest rock band ever, with Page as its architectural genius. Inside Tower House, the archive he spent half a century building, lived the original master tapes from Zeppelin sessions, instruments from every era of his work, original artwork, documents, photos, and unreleased material whose full extent only he knows. In 2024, his social media mentioned the 1993 Coverdale Page album and hinted at an expanded release featuring an unheard track called Saccharine. David Coverdale had discussed a box set since 2018, but nothing came of it. Whether this signals fresh creativity or archival housekeeping remains uncertain. "I'm never not doing something," Page told Classic Rock in 2020, "and I'm never not doing something that's going to surprise people." He meant it. In that same interview, he addressed regret. "Regrets can grow into resentments, and I try not to hold resentments. If you come up against an obstacle, I can think of numerous ways around it. Whether musically or not, it's good to think positively rather than negatively." His family stretches across 6 decades and several countries. Daughter Scarlett, born in 1971 to French model Charlotte Martin, became a professional photographer. Son James Patrick Page III arrived in April 1988 to first wife Patricia, a model he met while she waitressed in New Orleans during the firm's American tour. They married in December 1986 and divorced in 1995. Daughters Zofia Jade and Ashen Hoseann came from second wife Jimena Gomez Baracha, met during the 1994 No Quarter Tour. Jimena founded the Action for Brazil's Children Trust in 1998, the charity that earned Page his OB. Then there's Scarlett Sabet, 35, who's been with Page nearly a decade inside Tower House. She shares a first name with his eldest daughter, a coincidence tabloids have loved. In a 2020 Tatler interview inside the very house Page refused to let David Bowie buy, Sabet said of their age gap, "On paper there's a massive difference, but when he's standing in front of me, I don't feel it. It doesn't impede us." Page has been sober for years, and Sabet sees this not as restriction, but shared value. The man who once consumed substances at levels that should have destroyed careers now cooks in a Holland Park kitchen and makes his partner laugh more than anyone else. The legacy needs no additions. Led Zeppelin 4 alone has moved over 37 million copies. A band that dissolved in December 1980 still outsells most active artists. The man who engineered every part of that machine, guitar tones, album art, occult symbols pressed into vinyl label decisions, tour percentages that rewrote industry rules, is alive, sober, productive, sitting in that extraordinary Holland Park house, surrounded by everything he's ever made. And by all signs, he's still not done. Biographer Bob Spitz, who wrote the most detailed Led Zeppelin book ever, concluded Page built not just music, but a method. And methods don't simply end. Few people talk about this. Page lives in a Victorian Gothic mansion in Holland Park, London, which he bought in 1972 specifically because David Bowie wanted it. Page simply refused to let Bowie have it. He outbid him, one moved in, and has stayed there ever since. Medieval painted ceilings, stained glass windows, walls lined with Zeppelin master tapes. Tower House was designed in 1875 by Victorian architect William Burgess as a monument to his own obsessions. Every room is a different world. Gold-painted ceilings, fireplaces carved with mythological figures, stained glass so intricate it took craftsmen years. Inside this extraordinary architecture, Page has sat quietly for over 50 years, tending an archive, doing things the world barely hears about. One of those things began in late 2013. Page attended a poetry reading at World's End Bookshop on King's Road in Chelsea. The poet was Scarlett Sabet, 24, of Iranian and Scottish-French descent, who just self-published her first collection. Page sat in the audience and watched. He later told Interview magazine, "The whole place hushed." Afterward, he waited, approached her, and they became friends first. In August 2014, a relationship began. When tabloids found out in January 2015, the reaction was predictably ridiculous. Every British newspaper ran the age gap. He was 71, she 25. Coverage got so intense that Page hired private security to escort Sabet to her job at the Chelsea Arts Club. In that 2020 Tatler interview inside Tower House, Sabet recalled, "It felt very uncomfortable. I felt my life was going to be over. I had such shame about it. Yet the relationship didn't collapse. It deepened." By 2019, Page had produced a spoken-word album for her, Catalyst, recorded in Tower House's basement studio. Sabet offered a description of Page rarely seen across 5 decades. "He's not just my partner. He's my best friend and the person who makes me laugh most. He doesn't drink. He's seen all sides of that coin. He's lost best friends." To understand Forbes's decision and the full weight of what Page built, go back to Surrey, 1956, an abandoned campfire-style acoustic guitar with a round hole, left behind in the house the Page family moved into on Miles Road in Epsom. No one came for it. No one explained its presence. James Patrick Page, born January 9, 1944, in Middlesex, picked it up. He never put it down. He learned almost entirely alone. A few lessons in Kingston, then rejection of formal instruction. "I got bored," he told guitar player, "so I learned by listening to records." It became a very personal journey. The records were remarkable for a 1950s Surrey schoolboy. Scotty Moore, whom Page called monumental, Cliff Gallup, Elmore James, B.B. King, and Lonnie Donegan, whose raw percussive skiffle hit Page like an electric shock and made him believe music was something he could actually do. In 1957, at 13, Page appeared on BBC's All Your Own. After leaving school, Page joined Neil Christian's touring band The Crusaders, playing Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee Lewis covers. The pace was punishing. Nearly 2 years of constant travel and bad accommodation wrecked his body. He contracted glandular fever, the kind that returns every 2 months and drains a person to near collapse. He stopped touring, enrolled at Sutton Art College to recover, kept playing through illness, and on Thursday evenings performed with the Interval Band at the Marquee Club on Oxford Street. Night after night, he stood in the same room as Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, and Ginger Baker, all young, all hungry, all competing. Page got noticed. John Gibb caught a performance and asked him to record. Soon after, Mike Leander at Decca offered regular studio work. His first Decca session, on January 2, 1963, was Diamonds by Jet Harris and Tony Meehan. It hit number 1 within weeks. Page was 19. What followed was one of rock's most remarkable parallel careers. A young man playing on generation-defining records while remaining almost entirely uncredited. In studios, he was Little Jim P., to distinguish him from Big Jim Sullivan, the other dominant session guitarist. Together, they formed a guitar insurance system for London's music industry. Between 1963 and 1966, Page appeared on The Who's I Can't Explain, 2 tracks of the Kinks' debut album, Merry and Faithful's As Tears Go By, Shirley Bassey's Goldfinger, and sessions for Donovan, Joe Cocker, early David Bowie, Petula Clark, Tom Jones, and Cliff Richard. One estimate places Page on roughly 60% of all UK top 10 recordings between 1963 and 1965. Page reflected, "My session work was invaluable. At one point, I was playing at least 3 sessions a day, 6 days a week, and rarely knew in advance what I'd be playing. I finally called it quits after I started getting calls to do music." 1 week after quitting, the Yardbirds called. Eric Clapton left the Yardbirds in 1964. Page said no out of loyalty to Clapton. When Clapton officially departed in 1965 and Page was offered the slot again, he said no again and recommended childhood friend Jeff Beck instead. In 1966, a London session changed everything. Page, Beck, John Paul Jones, Keith Moon, and Nicky Hopkins recorded Beck's Bolero, written by Page. The session sparked talk of a supergroup. Keith Moon said the project would go over like a lead balloon. John Entwistle's version, like a Led Zeppelin. The phrase stuck. Page formally joined the Yardbirds in 1966, then moved to twin lead guitar alongside Beck. Beck left in October 1966. Page used a cello bow on electric guitar strings, producing textures no rock musician had attempted. When Draja and McCarty left in 1968, Page was left with the band's name and a clear vision. Terry Reid declined as vocalist but recommended Robert Plant. Page tracked Plant to a July 20, 1968 performance. After the show, Page said, "I think we should get together." Plant recruited John Bonham. Page watched Bonham play live on July 31, 1968 and said, "I'd never seen anyone quite like Bonzo. I knew he'd be perfect." John Paul Jones completed the lineup. The four played together for the first time in a room beneath a record store on Gerrard Street in London in August 1968. Manager Peter Grant changed the spelling from Led Zeppelin to Led Zeppelin. By December 1968, they were playing their first U.S. dates. Led Zeppelin's commercial dominance was architected. All 9 studio albums reached the U.S. top 10. 6 hit number 1. They sold between 200 and 300 million records worldwide. 5 albums achieved Diamond certification. Stairway to Heaven was never released as a commercial single, yet became the most requested song on American rock radio throughout the 1970s. Ahmet Ertegun said of Page, "He is the least conventional, the most personal. He developed a magical, distinctive style." In 1974, Led Zeppelin launched Swan Song Records, giving them total creative control. Manager Peter Grant negotiated a touring deal, giving the band 90% of concert gate receipts. In 1977, Robert Plant's 5-year-old son, Carrick, died suddenly. Led Zeppelin didn't return to the road for 2 years. On September 25, 1980, John Bonham was found dead at Page's rented house. He'd consumed roughly 40 shots of vodka. He was 32. Page told People magazine, "I couldn't even look at my guitar. I'd made such a major statement being in a group like Zeppelin. It's the best of my playing, and one could never eclipse that." Led Zeppelin formally dissolved in December 1980. Page discovered Aleister Crowley at 15. By 1970, he'd opened an occult bookshop and purchased Boleskine House on Loch Ness. The 4th Led Zeppelin album, released with no title, contained Page's most deliberate occult encoding. His symbols also originated in a 1557 alchemical grimoire representing Saturn. The most serious controversy involves Laurie Maddox, who has described being 14 when a management member brought her to Page's hotel suite. Page was 28. He has never directly addressed this. Page formed the firm with Paul Rogers. Their 1994 MTV Unplugged special drew the network's highest ratings. John Paul Jones, excluded from the reunion without explanation, said at the 1995 Rock Hall induction, "Thank you, my friends, for finally remembering my phone number." The defining post-Zeppelin event was December 27, 2007, at London's O2 Arena. Ticket demand produced 20 million requests for about 18,000 seats, a world record. Backstage, Page pushed for a full world tour. Plant declined. That single night tells you everything about Jimmy Page's legacy. He wanted to prove one final time that what they'd built together was still the most powerful thing in any room on Earth. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think the man still has left to give the world?